I don't think I'll ever forget the first time my parents called my brother's kids the golden ones. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't subtle. It was loud enough for everyone in the room, including my children, to hear. We were sitting in my parents' living room, the kind of place that smelled like old wood polish and faint perfume. The TV was humming in the background, and the coffee table was cluttered with plates from the brunch we'd just finished. My kids, Ethan and Lily, were sitting quietly, coloring in their books, while my brother's children, Noah and Grace, were running around, knocking into furniture and shrieking with laughter. Mom laughed at one of Noah's clumsy tumbles and said in her overly sweet tone, "Oh, look at our golden ones. They brighten this whole house, don't they?" Everyone chuckled, except me and except Ethan, whose crayon froze mid-stroke on the page. I watched his little shoulders stiffen and Lily's lip tremble as she glanced at me. They understood. They weren't golden. They weren't even noticed. And in that single moment, something inside me cracked. Growing up, I had always suspected that my brother, Mark, was the favorite. He was the golden child long before his kids ever got the title. He could get away with anything: bad grades, skipped curfews, even wrecking my dad's car once when he was a teenager. Meanwhile, I was the one expected to follow every rule, to keep quiet, to not cause trouble. When I did well in school, it was expected. When Mark scraped by, it was impressive considering he was so busy with sports. I thought that maybe, just maybe, once we were adults, the playing field would even out, that I'd finally be treated as an equal. But I was wrong. Now, it wasn't just me being overlooked. It was my children, too. And that was the part I couldn't tolerate. That afternoon, after brunch was over, I found myself cleaning up plates while my mom and dad were still cooing over Noah and Grace. "They're just so special," my mom said as she kissed Grace's hair. "So bright. They'll do amazing things. I just know it." Ethan and Lily were sitting on the rug, forgotten. Lily had drawn a beautiful flower with her crayons, one she was clearly proud of. She held it up shyly to show my dad. He barely glanced at it before turning back to brag about how Noah had a real sense of humor. I felt my throat tighten, a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Lily slowly lowered the paper and tucked it back into her coloring book without saying a word. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a one-time slip. This wasn't me being overly sensitive. This was a pattern. The drive home was quiet. Ethan stared out the window, his chin resting on his palm. Lily clutched her coloring book like it was a secret she had to protect. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Mom," he asked, his voice small, "why doesn't Grandma like us as much as she likes Noah and Grace?" The question sliced me open. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. How do you answer something like that without breaking their hearts even more? I swallowed hard and said, "It's not that she doesn't like you, honey. Sometimes people don't know how to see what's right in front of them, but you're amazing, both of you." Don't you ever forget that Ethan didn't respond. He just turned back to the window, and in that silence, I made myself a promise. I was not going to let my parents' blindness define my children's worth. But the universe has a cruel way of testing your resolve, because that was only the beginning. The next few months were filled with golden comments, with subtle digs, with family gatherings that felt more like competitions than celebrations. My parents never outright said Ethan and Lily were less. They didn't have to. Their favoritism screamed it loud enough without words. Every time Noah scored a goal in soccer, my parents treated it like he'd won the World Cup. Grace brought home a C+ on a test once, and they cheered like she'd solved world hunger. Meanwhile, Ethan got straight A's. Lily's artwork was chosen for a local gallery showcase. I told my parents both times, waiting for the same pride, the same sparkle in their eyes. Instead, I got polite nods and distracted smiles. That's nice, dear," my mom said once, before immediately changing the subject back to Mark's family vacation plans. It didn't just sting, it burned, because I saw the way my kids noticed. Ethan stopped sharing his test scores. He said they didn't matter anyway. Lily stopped bringing her drawings around my parents altogether. She kept them tucked away in a folder in her room, safe from disinterest. My children, my beautiful, brilliant children, were learning that in their grandparents' eyes, they would never be enough, and I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. That's when the fire inside me really lit. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a mother. And no one was going to make my children feel like outsiders in their own family. But I had to be smart about this, because confronting my parents too soon would just lead to denial. I knew them. They would twist it, make me sound dramatic, and sweep it under the rug. I needed them to see the truth for themselves. I needed to make it undeniable. And the opportunity to do that was coming sooner than I realized. I used to tell myself that favoritism was just something kids exaggerated in their heads. But when I look back now, the signs were everywhere. I remember being 12 years old, sitting at the dinner table with my math test folded neatly beside my plate. I had studied for weeks, solved problem after problem until my eyes ached. When I finally earned a perfect score, I thought surely this would get me noticed. Dad barely looked up from his plate. "That's good," he said with a shrug, like I'd just told him I'd tied my shoelaces. Meanwhile, Mark was bragging about the soccer game he'd played that afternoon. His team had lost, and he hadn't scored a single goal. But Mom clapped her hands and beamed like he'd just been named captain of the national team. That was the script of my life. Achievement met with silence, mediocrity met with applause. By the time we were adults, I thought I'd made peace with it. I had built my own life, married David, and had Ethan and Lily. I told myself that whatever had happened in my childhood didn't matter anymore, because I had my own family now. But the first time my parents held Noah after he was born, I realized nothing had changed. Mom looked down at that baby like he was a miracle sent straight from heaven. "Our golden boy," she whispered, rocking him gently. I stood there holding Ethan's little hand, who was only 3 at the time. He tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Wasn't I golden too when I was a baby?" My heart cracked right there in the hospital hallway. It didn't stop at words. The favoritism seeped into actions too. Christmas gifts. My kids would get sweaters or coloring books. Noah and Grace, they'd get shiny new tablets, drones, even a puppy one year. Birthdays? My parents never missed a single one of Mark's kids' parties. They'd show up with balloons, cakes, and expensive gifts. For Ethan and Lily, it was always excuses. "We're busy. Maybe next year we'll send a card." Sometimes the card didn't even arrive. At family dinners, my kids were seated at the end of the table, quietly eating while my parents showered attention on Noah and Grace. My dad would lean in, ask Noah about school, laugh at every clumsy joke. He barely acknowledged Ethan, who was sitting right there, waiting for a single question, a single ounce of interest. It was like watching history repeat itself. But worse, because this time, it wasn't me they were ignoring. It was my children. One Thanksgiving stands out crystal clear in my mind. The whole family had gathered, the house warm with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. Everyone was sitting around the table, the air filled with chatter and clinking silverware. Lily, sweet and shy, had practiced a little song on the piano for weeks. She wanted to play it for her grandparents. She was so excited she could barely sit still through dinner, her little feet swinging under her chair. When dessert was finished, she gathered her courage and said, "Grandma, Grandpa, can I show you the song I learned?" Her face was glowing with pride, but Mom waved her off with a distracted hand. "Later, Lily, later." We're talking to Noah right now." Lily's smile faltered, but she nodded. She waited for her moment. An hour later, when she asked again, Dad sighed. "Maybe next time, sweetheart." It's getting late. She never got to play her song. That night, I tucked her into bed at home and found her crying quietly into her pillow. "Why don't they like me, Mommy?" she whispered, and I had no answer. Ethan started noticing too. He was older, more aware. He once asked, "Is it because Noah and Grace are smarter? Or because they're better at stuff?" I looked him straight in the eye and told him, "No, Ethan, you're just as smart, just as talented. Sometimes people get stuck seeing what they want to see, and they miss the truth. But I see you, always still." I could tell it wasn't enough. No matter how much love David and I gave them, children have a way of measuring their worth in the eyes of their grandparents, and my parents were failing them. The breaking point came one summer at a family barbecue. It was hot, the kind of day where the sun scorched the grass and sweat stuck to your skin. The kids were running around in the backyard while the adults sat under the shade of the patio. Noah had just finished a sloppy cartwheel, landing with his knees in the dirt. Everyone clapped and cheered like he'd performed in the Olympics. "Look at our golden boy," Mom exclaimed. Ethan, emboldened by the moment, stood up and said, "I can do 3 cartwheels in a row. "Want to see?" Before he could even start, Dad waved him off. "Careful, you'll hurt yourself." "Sit down, Ethan." The look on his face when he sat back down, it gutted me. His shoulders hunched, his eyes dropped, and the spark of pride he'd had just moments before vanished. And then, as if to twist the knife, Mom added, "That's why Noah is special. He's brave, he tries things. That's what makes him golden." Ethan didn't say a word for the rest of the day. That night, after the barbecue, I stood in the kitchen with David. I was shaking, holding back tears. "I can't keep doing this," I whispered. "I can't keep letting them treat our kids like this." David put his hands on my shoulders. "Then don't," he said simply, but it wasn't that easy. These were my parents. This was my family, and yet the thought of cutting them off or even confronting them terrified me. Still, deep down, I knew he was right. Something had to change, because my children were learning lessons they should never learn, that love was conditional, that worth was selective, that some people are golden while others are invisible. And as their mother, I couldn't let that continue. So when Christmas rolled around that year, I decided to watch closely, to pay attention, to gather every detail of the favoritism my parents tried to pretend didn't exist. Because one day soon, I was going to call them out. And when I did, there would be no denying it. Christmas at my parents' house was supposed to be magical. At least, that's how they always made it sound. The way Mom described it in the weeks leading up, our golden family all together again, just like old times, you'd think it was a Hallmark card. But for me, it was a test. A chance to watch carefully, to take in every detail, to make sure I wasn't imagining the favoritism that had been gnawing at me. We walked into the house that December afternoon, our arms full of carefully wrapped gifts. The tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments catching the glow of the twinkling lights. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air, and yet, even in that warmth, I felt the cold edge of exclusion waiting. As soon as we stepped through the door, Mom rushed past Ethan and Lily without so much as a hello. She swooped down to hug Noah and Grace, who had just arrived with Mark and his wife, Julia. "Oh, there are my golden babies," she squealed, pressing kisses on their cheeks. "Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without you two." I glanced at Ethan. His face was blank, but I saw his hand tighten around the gift bag he was carrying. Lily looked down at her shoes. Mom barely patted their heads before turning back to Noah and Grace. It was as if my kids had been reduced to shadows in their own grandparents' home. Gift opening only made it worse. Noah tore into his first box and pulled out a shiny new gaming console. The room erupted with cheers. Grace unwrapped a designer dollhouse set, and Mom clapped her hands like a child. Then came Ethan's turn. He carefully peeled back the wrapping paper, his face hopeful. Inside was a plain sweater, in 2 sizes too big, still with the clearance tag dangling off the sleeve. "Oh, isn't that nice?" Mom said absently, already turning her gaze back to Noah's pile of presents. Ethan forced a smile, but I knew my son. That sweater wasn't just cloth, it was confirmation. Confirmation that in his grandparents' eyes, he was second best. Lily's gift was no better. A box of crayons, the same kind she already had, dozens of at home. She whispered, "Thank you." So softly I barely heard her, then sat quietly, watching as Grace opened her 5th gift, another expensive toy. Dinner should have been the highlight. We all sat around the table, the turkey steaming in the center, candles flickering along the length of the spread. My dad raised a glass, smiling proudly. "To my son, Mark, for raising such wonderful kids. Our golden grandchildren. We couldn't be prouder." Everyone clinked glasses, except me. I felt Ethan's foot nudge mine under the table. Lily poked at her mashed potatoes without lifting her head. Not a single word about them. Not a single acknowledgement of who they were or what they'd accomplished that year. That was when I realized this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an oversight. This was a choice. My parents had chosen their favorites, and my children weren't on that list. The rest of the evening blurred together. More laughter directed at Noah's clumsy jokes, more praise for Grace's every word, more polite nods and dismissals for Ethan and Lily. When it was finally time to leave, my kids trudged to the car, their shoulders heavy. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. Lily was hugging her crayon box like it was the only thing that mattered, and something inside me snapped. That night, when we got home, I tucked the kids into bed and sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the Christmas lights wrapping around me. I thought about every time my parents had brushed off my kids, every ignored birthday, every lopsided gift, every proud announcement about Noah and Grace while Ethan and Lily's achievements were met with silence. I thought about Thanksgiving, about the barbecue, about the coloring books and sweaters and careless waves. And I knew, without a shred of doubt, that I couldn't let it continue. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was cruelty dressed up as tradition. The following week, Mark called me. His voice was smug, the way it always was when he felt superior. "Mom and Dad were saying how lucky I am," he said casually. "Not everyone has golden kids like mine. Guess you drew the short straw, huh?" I froze. "What did you just say?" "You know," he chuckled. "Don't take it personally, Em. They're just, well, they're special. My kids just shine brighter." I guess I could feel my blood boiling. My own brother, parroting my parents' words, basking in the glow of his children's pedestal while mine were left in the shadows. I ended the call quickly, but the rage stayed with me. That was the final straw. I sat down with David that night. "I can't do it anymore," I told him. My voice shook, but it was steady with conviction. I can't keep putting Ethan and Lily through this. It's breaking them. It's breaking me. He nodded slowly. "So what do you want to do?" "I need to confront them," I said, "not just for me, for our kids. They need to hear the truth loud and clear." David reached across the table and took my hand. "Then I'll stand with you." I didn't know exactly how it would play out. I didn't know what I would say or if my parents would even listen. But I knew one thing for sure. The next family gathering would be different. Because I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The next family gathering was Easter. I could feel the tension before we even got there. My stomach churned the whole drive, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that David finally put his hand over mine and whispered, "You've got this." Ethan and Lily were quiet in the back seat, staring out the windows. They knew what to expect by now. Praise showered on Noah and Grace, crumbs tossed their way. But what they didn't know was that this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. When we walked in, it was déjà vu. Mom's arms were wide open for Noah and Grace, smothering them with hugs and kisses. My children got a quick pat on the head before my parents turned back to my brother's family. The words came immediately. "Our golden ones," Mom said proudly, pulling Grace to her side. "They just light up the whole house." I saw Ethan's jaw tighten. Lily slipped her hand into mine. I forced a smile, but inside I was burning. Dinner was the same script as always. Mark bragged about Noah's soccer team, and my parents listened with rapt attention. Every joke he cracked, every small detail, "Coach said Noah has potential," was met with cheers and clapping. Grace showed off a mediocre painting she'd done for school, and Mom gushed, "What talent!" She takes after her father, truly golden. When I mentioned that Ethan had made honor roll again, Dad muttered, "Well, that's expected of him." He's the quiet type. When I proudly shared that Lily's art had been displayed in the local gallery, Mom barely looked up from cutting her ham. That's nice, dear." My kids sat there, shrinking smaller and smaller, their worth being chipped away one careless comment at a time. And then it happened. The breaking moment. After dinner, Lily mustered up her courage and brought her sketchbook to the table. "Grandma, Grandpa, I made this for you," she said softly, holding up a beautiful drawing of a spring garden. She had spent hours on it, carefully coloring each flower, adding little details that only she could imagine. Mom glanced at it for half a second before saying, "That's cute, sweetheart. Put it on the counter?" Then she turned to Noah, who was waving around a plastic Easter egg he'd found, and she laughed. "See? He's always the star of the show." I saw Lily's face crumble. She set the sketchbook down and slipped quietly out of the room. That was it. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The whole room fell silent. "Enough," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. All eyes turned to me. My parents, Mark, Julia, even Ethan, who looked startled. "Enough of this," I repeated, my hands trembling but my voice firm. "I'm done watching you tear down my kids while you worship Mark's." Mom blinked, stunned. "Emily, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I snapped. "Every time we come here, you call Noah and Grace your golden ones. You shower them with attention, gifts, praise. And Ethan and Lily, you treat them like they don't even exist." Dad frowned. "Now, don't be dramatic." "Don't you dare call me dramatic," I cut in, my voice shaking with fury. "I've sat here quietly for years, biting my tongue, watching you do to my kids exactly what you did to me growing up, and I won't let it happen anymore." Ethan looked frozen. Lily had come back to the doorway, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her eyes wide. "They notice it," I continued, pointing toward my children. "They feel it. Every ignored birthday, every lopsided gift, every time you dismiss their accomplishments while applauding Noah and Grace for the bare minimum. They know you don't see them, and it's breaking them." Mark scoffed. "Oh, come on, Em. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous. I turned on him like a whip." "Jealous? You think I'm jealous of you?" "No, Mark, I pity you. Because all you've taught your kids is entitlement. Mine are learning resilience. They're learning that love isn't about favoritism, it's about respect. Something this family clearly doesn't understand." Julia shifted uncomfortably. My parents stared at me, mouths slightly open. Finally, Mom spoke. Her voice was tight. "Emily, we love Ethan and Lily too. You're making this bigger than it is." "Really?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, when was the last time you remembered their birthdays? When was the last time you showed up for one of their events? When was the last time you called them anything other than nice, while gushing about how golden Noah and Grace are?" Silence. "You can't answer because you know the truth," I pressed. "You've been playing favorites since before I can remember. And I lived with it. But my children? They don't deserve that. They deserve grandparents who see them, who cherish them, who make them feel like they matter." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't back down. "If you can't be that for them, then you don't get to be in their lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face was red with anger. Dad looked like he wanted to yell but couldn't find the words. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but for once, she had no quick excuse, no deflection. Behind me, I felt David stand up, his hand steady on my shoulder. "Emily's right," he said firmly. "Our kids deserve better. And if you can't give it, then we'll walk away." I reached for Ethan and Lily's hands. They clung to me, their eyes wide, but for the first time, I saw something new there. Pride. They saw me standing up for them, and that mattered more than anything else in the world. Without another word, we left. I didn't look back at the table, at the shocked faces, at the untouched desserts. I walked out the door with my children beside me, my husband behind me, and a weight finally lifting off my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The ride home was quiet, except for the sound of the tires humming against the road. Ethan leaned against the window, his reflection blurred by passing streetlights. Lily held her sketchbook tightly to her chest like it was a shield. I gripped the steering wheel, half expecting someone to call, half terrified they would, but my phone stayed silent. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "Mom?" "Yes, baby?" Her voice was small, almost scared. "Did we do something wrong? Is that why Grandma and Grandpa don't like us as much as Noah and Grace?" My throat tightened. I had to blink hard to keep my vision clear on the road. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly, reaching for her hand at the red light. "You did nothing wrong. This is not your fault. Your grandparents' choices, their blindness, that's on them. You and Ethan are incredible. And if they can't see that, then it's their loss." I caught Ethan's eyes in the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything, but the way his shoulders relaxed told me he needed to hear it too. When we pulled into our driveway, David helped the kids inside, while I sat in the car for a minute longer. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, and now the weight of it pressed down on me. Had I just blown up my relationship with my parents for good? The answer came quickly, steady and sure. Maybe I had, but I wasn't sorry. For the first time, I had chosen my kids over my need for approval, and that was the only choice that mattered. The next morning, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from Mom. "Emily, you overreacted. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. We love your children, but you need to stop being so sensitive. Call us when you're ready to apologize." I stared at the words, my hands trembling, not an ounce of accountability, not even a hint that she understood the damage she had done. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and spent the day with Ethan and Lily. We baked cookies, we painted, we laughed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to check for validation from people who clearly couldn't give it. Weeks turned into months. My parents didn't call. My brother didn't either. Julia sent a brief message once asking if the kids wanted to come to Noah's birthday party, but I politely declined. And you know what? Life became lighter without their constant judgment hanging over us. David and I started new traditions. Family game nights, weekend hikes, road trips to places we'd always said we'd visit someday. Ethan began opening up more. He stopped hiding his achievements, proudly bringing home awards and projects. Lily flourished too. Her art bloomed. That sketchbook she once offered so timidly, it became a masterpiece, page after page, filled with color and imagination. And me, I realized that for years I had been chasing my parents' approval like it was oxygen. But it wasn't. I could breathe just fine without it. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mom's. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. It was long, filled with excuses. She wrote about how things came out wrong, about how they didn't mean to make the kids feel less than. But woven through the words was the same undertone of denial, never once a direct apology. The final line stung the most. We hope you'll come around. Family is family, after all. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to keep it safe, but to remind myself of something important. Sometimes family isn't about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up for you, who sees you, who loves you without conditions. And if my parents couldn't be that for me and my kids, then they weren't really family at all. Months later, I stood in the crowd at Lily's art showcase. Her painting, bright, vibrant, filled with life, hung proudly in the center of the room. I watched her beam as people stopped to admire it, as her teacher told her, "You have real talent." Ethan clapped the loudest, his grin wide. David wrapped his arm around me, whispering, "This is just the beginning." I felt tears prick my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from pride, from joy, from the realization that we were building something stronger, something healthier, something beautiful. And I knew then with absolute certainty that walking away from the dysfunction wasn't a loss. It was freedom. So if you've ever been treated like you or your children are less than by the very people who should be lifting you up, hear this. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to let their favoritism, their cruelty, their blind spots define you. You can choose better. You can create better. And sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do is walk away.